Her scream tore through the dusty air of Black Ridge. The crowd gathered in the town square fell silent for only a moment before erupting in cruel laughter. Catherine Ward stood bound to a weathered wooden post, her white dress stained with dirt and blood not her own. Her wrists bled where the ropes cut deep. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, casting harsh shadows across the faces of men who had abandoned their humanity for entertainment. The auctioneer, a thin man with yellow teeth, raised his wooden mallet. "Who will start the bidding for this fine specimen? Feisty, but that can be broken out of her." More laughter. A stone struck the post beside Catherine's head. She flinched but refused to cower. Her swollen eye barely opened, but the other burned with defiance. "I'm just a joke to you all," she whispered, her voice cracking like glass. A man stepped forward from the crowd, flask in hand. His unshaven face twisted into a sneer as he raised a Remington revolver. "Let's see how high she jumps with a bullet in her foot." The crowd roared its approval. Sheriff Parker stood at the edge of the square, his badge glinting in the sun, his eyes firmly fixed on his boots. The gunman cocked his weapon. A single shot exploded across the square. But it wasn't the drunk's gun that had fired. The man screamed, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. His Remington clattered to the dirt. The crowd parted like a sea before judgment. Thomas Hawkeye Morgan strode into the square, gun smoke still curling from the barrel of his Colt .45 Peacemaker. At 45, Morgan carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen death and delivered it in equal measure. His face, weathered by sun and wind, bore a long scar down his left cheek, a souvenir from Shiloh. His eyes, clear blue and sharp as a hawk's, never left the wounded man writhing in the dirt. "Shooting an unarmed woman tied to a post," Morgan's voice carried across the square without him raising it. "That what passes for courage in Black Ridge these days?" He holstered his weapon with practiced precision, the ivory grip embossed with a single name, Elizabeth. From the balcony of the Black Diamond Saloon, Maxwell Bishop watched, his face a mask of controlled rage. At 50, Bishop still cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, his silver hair swept back beneath an expensive hat. The scar across his throat pulsed red with anger. "Morgan!" he called out, his voice raspy from an old war wound. "This is a legal auction. This woman is my property." Morgan didn't look up. "She's my wife," he declared, each word landing like a hammer blow. Then he added more quietly, "If she says yes." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Bishop's knuckles whitened on the balcony rail. Morgan approached the post where Catherine stood. Despite her bruises, despite her torn dress and matted hair, her eyes remained clear and calculating. This was no helpless victim, but a woman of substance pushed to the edge. Morgan removed his duster coat and placed it gently around her shoulders. He leaned in close, his voice for her ears alone. "Do you want this? Do you want me to claim you?" "The choice is yours." The square fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Catherine's split lips parted. "I do," she said, her voice weak but steady. "By my own say." A voice called from the courthouse steps. Judge Wilson, the oldest man in the county, nodded gravely. "Marriage witnessed and recorded. Release her to his protection until proper papers can be filed." The auctioneer lowered his mallet, his face twisted with disappointment. Morgan pulled a gleaming knife from his belt. With one swift motion, he cut through Catherine's bonds. The ropes fell to the ground like dead snakes. She stumbled forward, her legs weak from standing, and he caught her with a strong arm. "This ain't over, Morgan," Bishop called from the balcony. "Not by a long shot." Morgan's hand hovered near his holster. "I'm counting on it, Bishop." As Morgan guided Catherine away from the post, the crowd parted again. Some men cursed under their breath. Some women looked away in shame. Some children stared in awe at the man who had defied Maxwell Bishop in his own town. Catherine looked back once at the post where she'd been tied. Her voice broke but carried far enough for the front row to hear. "I am not a joke." Morgan led her to where his black Morgan stallion, Thunder, stood waiting. As they mounted and rode out of town, Bishop's voice followed them like a curse. "You remember what happened to your last wife, Morgan? Shame how the fever took her so sudden." Morgan's jaw clenched, but he did not turn back. The ride to Triple M Ranch stretched 5 miles across open country. Catherine clung to the saddle horn, her body aching from the beating she'd received. Morgan rode straight-backed, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. A man who'd survived the war by never letting his guard down. The ranch house stood on a gentle rise, 2 stories of solid timber with a wide porch and a barn that could stable 20 horses. The Triple M brand was burned into the main post, 3 stylized M's that looked like mountain ranges. Morgan helped Catherine down from Thunder. "Let's get you some water," he said, opening the door and nodding for her to enter first. Inside, the house was sparse but clean. A Springfield rifle hung above the fireplace. Maps of the territory covered one wall, marked with trails and water sources. Not the home of a simple rancher, but of a tactician. Catherine sank into a chair at the oak table. Her hands trembled as she lifted the tin cup of water Morgan provided. The first sip burned her throat, not from heat, but from the taste of freedom. Morgan leaned against the wall, watching her with those hawk-sharp eyes. "That stun in town only buys us time. Bishop won't let it go." She nodded. "I know." Then, meeting his gaze directly, "I have information about your wife, Elizabeth." Morgan went still. Only his eyes betrayed his shock, narrowing slightly before he regained control. "You've got my attention." Catherine reached into her boot and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "I found this among my sister Sarah's belongings after she died, 3 months ago." Morgan unfolded the paper. On it was a crude sketch of a wooden crate stamped with the letters MB. "Maxwell Bishop," he murmured. "My sister worked at the telegraph office," Catherine continued. "She noticed strange messages, women being shipped like cattle. When she investigated, she found those crates at the train depot. A week later, she died of sudden fever." Morgan's hand tightened on the paper, crinkling it. "Elizabeth died of fever 3 years ago, 2 days after she mentioned seeing strange crates behind Bishop's saloon." Catherine's eyes flashed. "Then you understand why I came to Black Ridge, why I had to get close to Bishop. And got caught." Morgan's voice wasn't accusatory, merely factual. "His men found me searching his office." Her hand unconsciously touched the bruise on her jaw. "I used to be a nurse in the Army hospital at Fort Laramie. I know the difference between natural disease and poison." Outside, the ranch dogs began to bark. Morgan moved with surprising speed to the window, then to the gun rack. "Stay here," he commanded, grabbing the Springfield and checking its load. Catherine stood. "I can handle myself." Morgan paused, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a small Derringer pistol. "2 shots, make them count." He disappeared into the gathering dusk. Catherine checked the Derringer, then moved to the window. 3 riders approached the barn, their faces obscured by bandanas. Bishop's men, no doubt. A shot rang out from the hayloft. One rider clutched his leg and fell from his horse. The other 2 returned fire, wood splintering around the barn window where Morgan had positioned himself. Catherine slipped out the back door, circling behind the house. Years of working in field hospitals had taught her to move quietly, to stay low. She reached the water trough as one of Bishop's men crept along the side of the barn, shotgun raised. She took aim with the Derringer and squeezed the trigger. The man howled as the bullet tore through his arm. His shotgun discharged into the air as he fell. Morgan emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. The third man tried to flee, but Morgan's throw sent a hunting knife spinning through the air to embed itself in the man's thigh. The rider tumbled from his horse, screaming. In minutes, all 3 were disarmed and tied to the corral fence. The one Catherine had shot glared at her with hatred. Bishop will burn this place to the ground. Morgan examined a wooden crate that had fallen from one of the horses. The letters MB were branded into the wood. "Where are the women?" he demanded. The men remained silent until Morgan pressed his knife against the throat of their leader. "The old storage shed behind the train depot," the man gasped. "7 of them, moving out tomorrow night." Catherine and Morgan exchanged looks. The pieces were falling into place. "Who killed my wife?" Morgan's voice was deadly calm. The leader spat blood. "Bishop doesn't share his methods, but I heard him brag once. Said it was amazing what a few drops of something in a teacup could do. Make it look like nature taking its course." Morgan's knuckles whitened around the knife handle. For a moment, Catherine thought he might kill the man where he stood. Instead, he knocked him unconscious with the butt of his pistol. As night fell over the Triple M, Morgan and Catherine sat at the oak table, planning their next move. A map of Black Ridge lay between them, the train depot circled in pencil. "We go in at midnight," Morgan said, cleaning his Colt with practiced hands. "Free the women, gather the evidence." "And Bishop?" Catherine asked. Morgan looked up, the lamplight reflecting in his eyes. "Justice first, revenge second." Catherine studied him. "Why did you really step in today? You could have just shot Bishop and been done with it." Morgan was silent for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer and withdrew a faded photograph, a younger version of himself in Union blue standing beside another soldier. Maxwell Bishop before the scar, before the hatred. "We served together," Morgan said, his voice hollow with memory. "Scout detachment, gathering intelligence behind enemy lines. He was my friend, my brother in all but blood, until I discovered he was selling our intelligence to the Confederates. 47 men from our unit died in an ambush he made possible." He touched the scar on his cheek. "I confronted him. He tried to kill me. I should have ended it then, but I couldn't shoot my friend in the back as he ran." Catherine understood now. "So he came west, built his empire on human suffering, and you followed." Morgan nodded. "Elizabeth and I settled here 5 years ago. I thought he'd forgotten me, moved on. Then she started asking questions about crates behind his saloon. And suddenly took ill," Catherine finished. "I couldn't prove anything. But I knew." His hand closed around the Colt's ivory grip. "I've been waiting for the right moment, the right evidence." Catherine reached across the table and placed her hand on his. "Now we have it." Their eyes met, an understanding passing between them. Tomorrow would bring blood or justice or both. Tonight, they prepared. "You should know," Morgan said as he checked the action on the shotgun. "This marriage is just a legal fiction. Tomorrow, when this is over, you can go your own way." Catherine loaded shells into the Derringer. "Let's survive tomorrow first, then we'll talk about futures." Outside, an owl cried. The night wind whispered across the plains like the breath of a waiting predator. In Black Ridge, Maxwell Bishop sat in his office, a glass of whiskey in hand, planning the demise of Thomas Morgan and his new bride. The chessboard was set, the pieces were in motion, and blood would water the dust before the next sunset. Part 2. The Hunt. Dawn broke over the Triple M in streaks of crimson and gold. Morgan stood on the porch, watching the horizon with coffee in hand. He hadn't slept. Men like Bishop didn't wait for daylight to strike. Catherine joined him, her bruises darkening, but her movements more fluid after a night's rest. She'd exchanged her torn dress for clothes borrowed from Morgan's trunk, a simple shirt, vest, and riding pants that must have belonged to Elizabeth. They hung loose on her frame, but offered freedom of movement that a dress could not. "I telegraphed a friend in Laramie last week," she said, accepting the cup Morgan offered. "A doctor who examined Sarah's body. He confirmed traces of a poison used by Confederate spies during the war, a derivative of oleander that mimics typhoid fever." Morgan's jaw tightened. Bishop's specialty in the war. Untraceable unless you know what to look for. A rider appeared on the distant ridge, kicking up dust as he approached. Morgan's hand moved to his holster, but Catherine touched his arm. "That's Dr. William Hayes," she said. "My contact from Laramie. I asked him to meet us here." The doctor was a slight man with spectacles and a medical bag that had seen better days. He dismounted stiffly, nodding to Catherine before extending his hand to Morgan. "I examined both Sarah Ward and, 3 years ago, Elizabeth Morgan," he said without preamble. "Same poison, same method. I've documented everything for the federal marshal." Morgan led them inside, where Hayes spread his papers across the table. Detailed drawings of symptoms, chemical analyses, witness statements. "Bishop's careful," Hayes warned. "These women in the depot, they're witnesses, evidence. He won't let them leave alive." Morgan nodded grimly. "Then we move now, not midnight." He spread the town map wider, pointing to the rear of the train depot. "Service tunnel here, dug during mining days, comes up inside the old storage room. Bishop probably doesn't know it exists." Catherine studied the route. "What about Sheriff Parker?" "Bishop's man," Morgan replied. Hayes shook his head. "Not entirely. Bishop has Parker's daughter locked in the rooms above the saloon. Insurance against the law." Morgan considered this new information. "3 targets, then. The women at the depot, the evidence in Bishop's office, and the sheriff's daughter." "We can't be in 3 places at once," Catherine pointed out. Morgan's eyes narrowed in thought. "We won't have to be." The plan came together over the next hour. Hayes would create a distraction, a medical emergency at the far end of town, to draw eyes and manpower away from their true objectives. Catherine would free the women while Morgan retrieved the evidence. Then together they would rescue Parker's daughter from the saloon. As Morgan checked his weapons one last time, Catherine approached him with a small leather pouch. "Army medicine," she explained. "For pain, for courage." Morgan shook his head. "I need a clear mind." "It's not for you," she said softly. "It's for the women. Some may be in bad condition." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Respect, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. An hour later, they rode into Black Ridge from different directions. Hayes headed for the north end of town, his medical bag prominently displayed. Catherine, dressed now as a simple ranch hand, her hair tucked beneath a wide hat, made for the back alleys behind the depot. Morgan rode directly down Main Street, every inch the confident rancher on business, nodding to townspeople who averted their eyes. No one wanted to be seen acknowledging the man who had defied Maxwell Bishop. Morgan tethered Thunder outside the telegraph office, across from Bishop's saloon. From here, he could observe the comings and goings, while appearing to mind his own affairs. Bishop's office window was visible on the second floor, currently dark. The man himself had not been seen. A commotion erupted from the north end of town. Hayes had begun his performance. Something about contaminated water and 3 men fallen ill. People hurried toward the noise, including 2 of Bishop's guards from outside the saloon. Morgan moved then, crossing the street with purpose. Not sneaking, not rushing, just a man with business at the saloon. The remaining guard recognized him too late. Morgan's fist connected with the man's jaw before he could shout, dropping him unconscious behind a water trough. Inside, the saloon was nearly empty this early in the day. A bartender polishing glasses, a drunk asleep at a corner table, a piano player practicing softly. None looked up as Morgan ascended the stairs as if he belonged there. Bishop's office door was locked, but the hinges were on the inside. A mistake. 3 shots from the Colt reduced them to splinters. Morgan was through the door before the echo faded. The office was opulent. Leather chairs, expensive rugs from back east, a massive desk of polished mahogany. Morgan went straight for the hidden safe behind a painting of a Civil War battle. Some things never changed, including Bishop's vanity. The combination was the date of the ambush that had killed 47 Union soldiers. Bishop's proudest achievement, The safe swung open, and inside lay ledgers, contracts, a bag of gold coins, and a small wooden box. Morgan took it all, stuffing them into a canvas bag. As he turned to leave, movement caught his eye. A figure stood in the doorway. Sheriff Parker, his badge gleaming dully in the half-light, his revolver pointed at Morgan's chest. "He has my Emily," Parker said, his voice cracking. "My little girl." Morgan kept his hands visible, away from his holster. "I know, we're getting her out today. All of them." Parker's gun wavered. "Bishop will kill her if—" "Bishop's going down," Morgan cut him off. "Federal charges, murder, slavery, treason during wartime. Evidence that can't be buried." The sheriff's resolve visibly crumbled. His shoulders sagged as he lowered his weapon. "What do you need me to do?" "Be ready at the depot in 1 hour," Morgan told him, "with deputies you trust, if any, and get word to the federal marshal in Cheyenne." Parker nodded, hope flickering in his tired eyes for the first time. "Morgan, thank you." Morgan brushed past him. "Don't thank me yet. This gets bloody before it's over." Across town, Catherine slipped through the abandoned mine tunnel, emerging into the dusty darkness of the depot's storage room. Crates lined the walls, many bearing the MB brand. The air was thick with the smell of fear and unwashed bodies. The women were kept in a makeshift pen of wooden slats and barbed wire. 7 of them, as the henchman had said. Some curled into themselves, broken. Others stared with dull hatred. One stood at the front, watching Catherine's approach with calculating eyes. "I'm a friend," Catherine whispered, producing lockpicks from her vest. "Sarah Ward's sister." The woman at the front stiffened. "Sarah? The telegraph girl?" Catherine nodded, working on the padlock. "You knew her." "Abigail Mills, we worked together." The woman's eyes narrowed. "They said she died of fever." "Murder," Catherine replied as the lock clicked open. "Same as Elizabeth Morgan 3 years ago. We have proof now." She swung the gate wide, passing out canteens of water and small bundles of clothes she'd carried in. "There's a doctor waiting at the Triple M Ranch. We have horses hidden behind the Cooper shop." Abigail helped the weakest women to their feet. "Bishop will hunt us down." "Not after today," Catherine assured her, checking the service tunnel. "Morgan's gathering evidence as we speak. Bishop faces the gallows this time." A sharp crack of gunfire echoed from outside. Catherine froze, then hurried to a small window. 2 of Bishop's men lay sprawled in the dirt. Morgan stood over them, Colt in hand, smoke curling from the barrel. More men were converging from the direction of the saloon. Bishop himself strode among them, his silver hair gleaming in the sun, a shotgun cradled in his arms. "Run!" Catherine urged the women toward the tunnel. "Follow it all the way out. The doctor will find you." Abigail hesitated. "What about you?" Catherine checked the Derringer. "I have unfinished business." Outside, Morgan took cover behind a water trough as bullets splintered wood around him. He'd counted 6 men plus Bishop. 2 down already. Against 4 and Bishop, he liked his odds, until more gunmen emerged from the general store. "You're surrounded, Morgan." Bishop's raspy voice carried over the gunfire. "Throw out your weapons." Morgan's response was a precisely aimed shot that took down another of Bishop's men. He was outnumbered but not outmatched. Every man out there was a hired gun. Morgan had survived Shiloh and Antietam in the wilderness. He'd scouted behind enemy lines when a single mistake meant death. Still, ammunition was finite. He counted his remaining rounds. 6 in the Colt, 4 in the shotgun tucked against his leg, another 12 in his belt. Not enough for a prolonged siege. Movement on the depot roof caught his attention. Catherine crouched there, Derringer in hand, having climbed out through an upper window. She signaled to him, pointing to a stack of barrels beside the general store, where 3 of Bishop's men had taken cover. Morgan understood immediately. He fired twice more, forcing the men to duck lower behind the barrels, focusing their attention on him. Catherine took aim with the Derringer and fired into the barrels. The explosion ripped through the morning air as the whiskey inside ignited, engulfing the gunmen in flames. Chaos erupted. Morgan seized the moment, breaking cover to sprint toward the station house, firing as he went. A bullet grazed his arm, but adrenaline dulled the pain. Catherine leapt from the roof as Bishop swung his shotgun toward her. She rolled behind a trough, the blast of buckshot shredding wood where she'd been a heartbeat before. "Morgan!" Bishop roared, his face twisted with hatred. "Face me like a man!" Morgan appeared at the corner of the depot, Colt leveled. "I'm right here, Max." For a moment, the two men stood 20 paces apart, as if time had rewound to those duels of legend. Former friends turned mortal enemies, each with blood on his hands, each believing justice was on his side. Bishop fired first, his shotgun booming in the sudden silence. Morgan dove sideways, his own shot going wide. He rolled behind a wagon as Bishop's second barrel discharged, peppering the ground with lead. Townspeople had begun to gather at a safe distance, drawn by the gunfire. Among them stood Sheriff Parker and 3 deputies, rifles ready but held in check, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Bishop laughed, a harsh sound like tearing metal. "You always were too righteous, Tom. Too bound by rules while the rest of us seized opportunity." Morgan reloaded behind the wagon. 47 men died because of you, Max. Good men. And then Elizabeth. And how many women sold into hell? "Business," Bishop called back, breaking open his shotgun to reload. "Just business. Nothing personal about Elizabeth. She should have minded her own affairs." "It's personal now," Morgan replied, his voice deadly calm. Catherine had circled during their exchange, working her way behind Bishop. As he focused on Morgan, she struck, driving the butt of a discarded revolver into the back of his knee. Bishop went down with a howl, his shotgun discharging into the air. Catherine kicked it away, but Bishop was far from finished. He lashed out with surprising speed, catching her ankle and pulling her down. They grappled in the dirt, Bishop's greater strength against Catherine's desperate fury. His hands closed around her throat. The click of a Colt's hammer, freezing inches from Bishop's temple, stopped him cold. "Let her go," Morgan commanded, "or I paint the street with what passes for your brains." Bishop released Catherine, who rolled away, gasping for breath. "You won't shoot an unarmed man, Tom," he sneered. "Not the great Thomas Morgan, hero of the Union." Morgan's eyes were cold as a winter sky. "You're right. I won't." He lowered the Colt slightly and fired. Bishop screamed as the bullet shattered his kneecap, the same knee Catherine had struck. He collapsed, clutching the wound as blood soaked through his expensive trousers. Morgan stood over him, ejecting the spent cartridge. "That's for the 47. He chambered another round and aimed again. "This one's for Elizabeth." Bishop's face contorted with fear for the first time. "You said you wouldn't?" "I said I wouldn't shoot an unarmed man," Morgan corrected him. "I didn't say anything about not shooting a murderer." Sheriff Parker stepped forward then, his rifle trained on Bishop. "That's enough, Morgan. He'll stand trial." "There won't be a trial," Bishop spat through gritted teeth. "I own judges from here to Chicago." Morgan kept the Colt aimed at Bishop's head for a long moment. The crowd held its collective breath. Catherine watched, understanding the war raging behind those hawk-sharp eyes. Justice versus vengeance. Law versus retribution. Finally, Morgan uncocked the hammer and holstered his weapon. "You're right, Sheriff," he said, not taking his eyes off Bishop. "Some things need to be done by the book. Where's your daughter?" "Upstairs at the saloon," Bishop ground out, pale from pain and blood loss. "Third door on the left. Not that it matters now. My men will—" "Your men are dead or running," Catherine interrupted, getting to her feet. And the women from the depot are safe. Sheriff Parker dispatched his deputies to rescue his daughter, while townsfolk, emboldened by Bishop's fall, began to gather closer. Among them, Dr. Hayes pushed through with his medical bag. "Interesting case of poisoning here," he announced loudly, producing documents from his bag. "Same as killed Elizabeth Morgan and Sarah Ward. I've taken the liberty of informing the federal authorities." As if on cue, a group of riders appeared at the edge of town, marshals from Cheyenne, summoned by Parker's telegram earlier that morning. Bishop's face went slack with the realization that his empire was crumbling. His eyes found Morgan's, hatred mingling with something like respect. "You played a longer game than I gave you credit for," he admitted. "But this isn't over, Tom. Not while I breathe." Morgan turned away. "It's over, Max. Has been since Antietam." As the marshals took Bishop into custody, the women from the depot emerged from hiding. Abigail Mills stepped forward, pointing an accusing finger. "That man had my sister killed when she discovered his slave trade," she announced to the gathering crowd. "Sarah Chambers from the telegraph office. Remember her? Died of fever last spring." Other voices joined in. A shopkeeper who had been forced to pay protection money. A farmer whose land had been seized when he couldn't meet Bishop's extortionate loan terms. Years of abuses pouring forth now that fear no longer silenced them. In the midst of it all, Sheriff Parker emerged from the saloon with a young woman, Emily, his daughter, pale but unharmed. The reunion brought tears to more than one weathered face in the crowd. Morgan and Catherine stood apart, watching as justice unfolded. The evidence from Bishop's safe was handed over to the federal marshals. The ledgers detailed every transaction, every woman sold, every bribe paid, names that would shake territories from Dakota to Texas. "It's really over," Catherine said softly, as if hardly daring to believe it. Morgan's eyes followed Bishop as the marshals led him away. "For now, what happens next?" she asked. Morgan touched the ivory grip of his Colt, fingers tracing Elizabeth's name. "Tomorrow comes, and the day after." As the crowd dispersed and the marshals prepared to transport Bishop to Cheyenne for trial, Morgan and Catherine mounted their horses to return to the Triple M. The women from the depot had been taken there already, under Dr. Hayes's care. The sun hung low in the western sky, painting the plains in golden shadow. Morgan rode tall in the saddle despite his wounded arm, eyes constantly scanning the horizon, a habit that had kept him alive through war and peace. Catherine studied him in the fading light. "That marriage," she said finally, "the one that saved me from the auction post. You said it was just a legal fiction." Morgan nodded without looking at her. "It served its purpose. When you're ready to move on, Judge Wilson can dissolve it quietly." "And if I'm not ready?" The question hung in the air between them. Morgan turned to her then, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "The Triple M has room enough, and Bishop's not the only one who deals in human misery. There's work to be done." Catherine smiled for the first time since he'd known her. "Then perhaps Mrs. Morgan should stick around a while." As they crested the rise overlooking the Triple M, movement in the tree line caught Morgan's attention. He reined in sharply, hand dropping to his holster. 3 riders emerged from the shadows, rifles raised. Bishop's men, the ones who'd escaped the fight in town. "Get down!" Morgan shouted, drawing his Colt as bullets whistled past. The final battle for justice had only just begun. Part 3. The Reckoning. Thunder's flanks were slick with sweat as Morgan pushed the stallion to its limit. Behind him, Catherine clung to his waist, the derringer clutched in her free hand. 3 riders pursued them across the open plain, hooves pounding like war drums in the fading light. One of Bishop's escaped men, the fastest, mounted on a bay mare, gained ground steadily. He raised his rifle, taking aim at Morgan's back. Catherine twisted in the saddle and fired. The Derringer's report was swallowed by the thunder of hooves, but the pursuer jerked sideways, nearly falling before regaining his seat. The shot had gone wide, but bought them precious seconds. The Triple M appeared on the horizon, a sanctuary if they could reach it. Morgan had planned for this, prepared defenses against Bishop's inevitable retaliation, but he hadn't expected it so soon, hadn't expected Bishop's men to risk attacking when federal marshals were in the territory. Desperate men took desperate chances. Morgan veered Thunder toward a shallow ravine that cut across the eastern pasture. It offered cover, a defensible position, and most importantly, the rifle cache he'd hidden there months ago, preparing for war. "When we reach the cut, drop and roll," he instructed Catherine, his voice tight with concentration. "Stay low. Work your way to the north end. There's a fallen cottonwood with weapons." She nodded against his back, understanding immediately. No questions, no fear, just grim determination. In another life, she would have made a fine soldier. They reached the ravine at full gallop. Morgan leaned low over Thunder's neck, guiding the powerful horse down the steep embankment. At the bottom, he pulled sharply on the reins, bringing Thunder to a sliding stop. Catherine dismounted in one fluid motion, rolling behind an outcropping of rock as bullets kicked up dirt around them. Morgan slapped Thunder's flank, sending the horse galloping down the ravine to safety, then dove for cover himself. A rifle bullet struck stone inches from his head, showering him with rock fragments. Two of the pursuers had dismounted at the ravine's edge, taking up firing positions. The third, the one Catherine had shot at, circled, likely seeking another way down. Morgan drew his Colt, checked the load, and took a deep breath. 5 shots remained. Make them count. He raised up quickly, fired twice, and dropped back down. A scream told him at least one shot had found its mark. Catherine had reached the fallen tree and now returned, carrying a Winchester repeating rifle and a cartridge belt. "Bishop's personal guard," she said, sliding the rifle to Morgan. "The ones who escaped town. They'll have sent word to his other holdings by now." Morgan nodded, checking the Winchester's action. Fully loaded. "Bishop has men in 3 counties, hired guns mostly. They won't all come, but enough will." "For revenge? Or to silence us?" "Both." Morgan peered over the rocks. One pursuer lay motionless at the ravine's edge. Another was moving laterally, seeking a better angle. The third had disappeared. "We need to reach the ranch. The women from the depot are there, and Hayes." Catherine's eyes widened. "They're targets, too." The gravity of the situation settled between them. This wasn't just about survival now. Innocent lives depended on their next move. Morgan made his decision. "I'll draw their fire. You circle back, use the dry creek bed. It leads all the way to the north pasture. And leave you here." Catherine shook her head. "We go together or not at all." Before Morgan could argue, gunfire erupted from the direction of the Triple M, not coming toward them, but from the ranch itself, directed outward. Someone at the homestead was already under attack. "Hayes," Catherine whispered. "He was a surgeon in the war." Morgan's jaw set in a grim line. Change of plans. In one swift move, he rose and fired the Winchester rapidly, forcing the remaining pursuers to duck for cover. Catherine understood immediately, providing additional covering fire with her reloaded Derringer. Together they scrambled up the far side of the ravine, staying low, using the terrain for protection. They emerged onto the open plain 200 yards from where they had entered the ravine. The ranch house was visible now, smoke rising from several windows. Flashes of gunfire came from the barn and the house itself. "The women!" Catherine gasped. "Abigail and the others!" "Hayes would have gotten them to the storm cellar," Morgan assured her, though his own fears churned beneath his calm exterior. "This way." They moved through the gathering darkness, using every fold in the land for concealment. Morgan led them on a circuitous route through a stand of cottonwoods that approached the ranch from the west, the direction their attackers wouldn't expect. As they reached the edge of the trees, the full situation became clear. 5 riders had surrounded the ranch house. 2 lay motionless in the yard. Hayes or someone inside had exacted a price for the attack. The remaining 3 had taken positions around the structure, pinning down the defenders with periodic fire. 8 shots left in the Winchester, Morgan murmured, checking his ammunition. 5 in the Colt. You? 2 in the Derringer, Catherine replied. Not enough. Morgan's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the battleground that had once been his home. It's enough if we're smart. Follow my lead, stay in cover, and when I give the signal, run for the barn. He moved first, cat quiet through the lengthening shadows. Catherine followed, matching his movements. They circled behind the southernmost attacker. A man in a black duster crouched behind the water trough, reloading a shotgun. Morgan closed the distance in 3 swift strides. His hunting knife entered beneath the man's ribs and withdrew in one practice motion. The attacker made no sound as Morgan eased him to the ground, taking the shotgun and ammunition. 1 down, he whispered, handing Catherine the shotgun. 2 to go. They separated then, Catherine moving toward the barn, while Morgan circled toward the north side of the house. The plan was simple. Flank the attackers, create crossfire, clear a path to the house. Catherine reached the barn unseen. Inside, she found Abigail Mills and Dr. Hayes crouched behind hay bales, both armed with old revolvers. Morgan? Hayes asked anxiously. Working his way around, Catherine replied, checking the shotgun's load. How many inside the house? 4 women in the storm cellar, Abigail answered. Sheriff Parker's daughter is with them. 2 of Bishop's men tried to break in there first. We stopped them. She gestured to a body partially covered by a horse blanket. Hayes's left arm was bandaged, blood seeping through the cloth. 3 more attacked the house directly. I saw them drag someone out. One of the deputies who rode out with us from town. Catherine's blood ran cold. They're taking hostages. A sharp whistle cut through the evening air. Morgan's signal. Catherine moved to the barn door, shotgun ready. Cover me, she instructed Hayes and Abigail. Aim for the man by the woodpile. She burst from the barn as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. The shotgun boomed, scattering buckshot across the space between her and the nearest attacker. The man dove for cover, returning fire with a pistol. From the north side of the property, Morgan opened up with the Winchester, driving the 3rd attacker back toward the front of the house. The crossfire had its intended effect. Confusion, division of attention. Catherine reached the back porch, pressing her back against the wall as bullets splintered wood around her. Hayes and Abigail provided covering fire from the barn, forcing the nearest attacker to stay down. Morgan worked his way closer to the house, using an overturned wagon for cover. 3 shots left in the Winchester. He made them count, firing with the precision that had earned him his nickname. 1 attacker fell, clutching his shoulder. The last man standing, a tall figure in a battered cavalry hat, realized the tide had turned. He scrambled toward his horse, firing wildly to cover his retreat. He's getting away! Abigail shouted from the barn. Morgan stepped into the open, drawing a bead with his Colt. The range was extreme for a handgun, nearly 100 yards. He exhaled slowly, compensating for the fading light and distance. The Colt roared. The escaping rider pitched forward out of the saddle, tumbling to the dirt. Silence descended over the Triple M, broken only by the moans of the wounded. Catherine emerged cautiously from the back of the house, shotgun still at the ready. Hayes and Abigail ventured from the barn. Morgan surveyed the battlefield, ensuring no threats remained. The women, he called to Catherine. Safe in the cellar, she confirmed, but they took a hostage, one of Parker's deputies. Morgan nodded grimly. I saw. They're heading for Bishop's hunting cabin up in the foothills. Last refuge for his operation. Hayes approached, medical bag in hand. They'll torture that deputy, get names of witnesses, judges involved in the case. Then we go after them, Catherine declared, checking the shotgun's load. Not we, Morgan corrected her. I go alone. You stay with the women. Catherine's eyes flashed with determination. That's not how this works. Not anymore. Before Morgan could argue, hoofbeats sounded from the eastern approach. Everyone tensed, weapons raising. A moment later, Sheriff Parker appeared with 4 deputies and 2 federal marshals, riding hard. Relief washed over Morgan's face. Sheriff, your timing is impeccable. Parker dismounted, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. Followed the gunfire. My men at the saloon intercepted a rider headed this way. Bishop's put a $1,000 bounty on both your heads. The federal marshal, a weathered man named Hollister, stepped forward. Bishop's been talking, trying to cut a deal. Claims he has evidence that will implicate half the territorial officials in Colorado and Wyoming. He's stalling, Morgan replied. Buying time for his men to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence. They've taken Deputy Collins, Sheriff Parker added, his face grim, heading for the high country, according to our prisoner in town. Marshal Hollister nodded. We tracked them to the foothills before losing daylight. They've holed up at a cabin 6 miles northwest. Morgan exchanged looks with Catherine. Bishop's hunting lodge. Defensible position, clear lines of sight in every direction. We'll head out at first light, Hollister decided. Full posse. Collins will be dead by then, Morgan countered, and they'll be gone. This has to happen tonight, the marshal frowned. You can't be serious. Night assault on an entrenched position? That's suicide. Morgan's eyes reflected the determination that had carried him through the war. Not if you know the terrain, not if you've planned for this day for 3 years. He led them into the house to a back room that had once been Elizabeth's study. A large map was tacked to the wall, every detail of the surrounding 50 miles meticulously recorded. The hunting lodge was circled in red, with approach routes, cover, and firing positions all marked. I've been preparing for a final confrontation with Bishop since Elizabeth died, Morgan explained. I know every rock, every tree, every shadow around that cabin. Catherine studied the map, her nurse's training allowing her to see it as a battlefield. You'll need medical support for Collins and any other wounded. Hayes stepped forward. I'll go. Patched up enough bullet wounds in the war to qualify. Sheriff Parker traced the most direct route to the cabin. 4 of my men, the 2 marshals, Morgan, Hayes, and me, Catherine finished firmly. I didn't come this far to sit and wait. Parker hesitated, but Morgan nodded his acceptance. 8 of us then. Against how many, Sheriff? Prisoners said 6 men rode out with Collins, plus however many were already at the cabin. Morgan calculated quickly. 10 at most. Bishop kept his inner circle small, trusted few. Marshal Hollister still looked skeptical. Even with surprise on our side, those are narrow odds. And in darkness is our ally, Morgan countered. I've scouted that cabin by moonlight a dozen times. Know it better than Bishop's men do. The plan came together quickly. They would approach from 3 directions, using the rocky terrain for cover. Morgan would lead the main assault team from the north, where the cabin's defenses were weakest. Parker and 2 deputies would create a diversion from the east. Catherine, Hayes, and Marshal Hollister would circle to the west to cut off escape routes and recover Collins if possible. As the others prepared, Morgan took Catherine aside. Last chance to reconsider, he said quietly. This isn't your fight. Catherine checked the load in the shotgun Hayes had given her. It became my fight when Sarah died. When you cut me down from that post, when Abigail and those women were imprisoned like animals. Morgan studied her face in the lamplight. The bruises were fading, but the determination in her eyes burned brighter than ever. Then stay close to Hayes. Watch the western slope. That's their likeliest escape route. She nodded, understanding the unspoken concern beneath his tactical directions. I'll see you when it's over, Thomas. It was the first time she'd used his given name. Something shifted between them in that moment. A recognition that whatever happened at Bishop's cabin, they were bound together now by more than circumstance or revenge. The moon rose over the foothills, casting silver light across the rocky landscape. Morgan led his team through a narrow draw, every step placed with care to avoid dislodging stones. Behind him, Sheriff Parker's men moved with similar caution. To the west, Catherine's group had already disappeared into the shadows. The cabin appeared exactly as Morgan remembered it, a substantial structure of logs and stone, built to withstand winter storms and unwanted visitors. A single window glowed with lamplight. Two horses were tethered outside, suggesting most of Bishop's men had already fled or hadn't yet arrived. Morgan signaled Parker to begin the diversion. Moments later, a carefully controlled fire blazed to life among the trees east of the cabin. As expected, the door opened and a figure stepped onto the porch, rifle ready. Morgan's Winchester cracked once. The figure collapsed. The battle for Bishop's final stronghold erupted in earnest. Gunfire blazed from the cabin's windows as the remaining defenders realized they were under attack. Morgan's team advanced steadily, using rocks and trees for cover, returning fire with disciplined precision. Inside the cabin, Deputy Collins lay bound and bloodied on the floor. Two of Bishop's loyal lieutenants, hardened killers who had executed Bishop's will for years, prepared for their last stand. They knew there would be no surrender, no mercy for men with their records. The older of the two, a man called Guthrie, had been with Bishop since the war. He peered through a gun port in the shutters, trying to gauge the number of attackers. "Marshals," he spat, "and Parker's men. Morgan's leading them." His companion, a younger man with cold eyes, checked his revolvers. Bishop said Morgan would come, said to leave him alive if possible. Guthrie nodded grimly. For the trial, a last act of revenge. Outside, Catherine and Hayes had reached their position on the western slope. Marshal Hollister covered the most likely escape path, a steep trail leading to a box canyon where fresh horses might be hidden. The gunfire from the cabin grew more sporadic as Morgan's team tightened the noose. Catherine watched the western window, shotgun ready. Movement inside caught her attention, a shadowy figure dragging something or someone. "Hayes," she whispered, "the back door. They're bringing out Collins." The doctor squinted through the darkness. "You're right. Using him as a shield." Catherine made a split-second decision. "Cover me." Before Hayes could object, she was moving, staying low, using the landscape for concealment. The cabin's defenders were focused on Morgan's frontal assault, unaware of her approach. The back door creaked open. Guthrie emerged, using Collins as a human shield, a revolver pressed to the deputy's temple. The younger killer followed, covering their retreat with a rifle. Catherine closed to within 20 yards, hidden behind a boulder. Hayes provided the distraction she needed, firing a single shot that struck rock near the younger man's head. As he turned to return fire, Catherine stepped out, shotgun leveled. "Drop it," she commanded, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Or I cut you in half." The younger man hesitated, calculating his chances. Guthrie tightened his grip on Collins, whose face was nearly unrecognizable beneath blood and bruises. "Back off, woman," Guthrie growled, "or the deputy dies right here." Catherine didn't waver. "He dies, you both die. Those are poor odds." The standoff hung in the balance for 3 heartbeats, then several things happened at once. Collins, summoning his last reserves of strength, drove his elbow into Guthrie's ribs. The killer's gun discharged, the bullet going wide. The younger man swung his rifle toward Catherine. The shotgun's roar echoed across the foothills. The younger killer was thrown backward, the entire right side of his chest a ruined mess. Guthrie recovered quickly, aiming at Catherine as Collins collapsed. Before he could fire, another shot rang out. Morgan, appearing like a ghost from the shadows, his Colt smoking in the moonlight. Guthrie fell, clutching his throat, blood bubbling between his fingers. His eyes found Morgan's in the darkness, recognition and old hatred flaring one last time before the light faded from them forever. The battle ended as suddenly as it had begun. Sheriff Parker and the marshals secured the cabin, finding maps that detailed escape routes and safe houses throughout the territory. Information that would dismantle what remained of Bishop's criminal empire. Hayes worked frantically to stabilize Collins, whose wounds were severe but not mortal. "He'll make it," the doctor assured Parker. "Tough as old leather, your deputy." Morgan found Catherine sitting on a rock outside the cabin, the shotgun across her knees. Blood spattered her clothing, but none of it was hers. She looked up as he approached, her eyes reflecting the dying firelight. "It's over," she said, a statement rather than a question. Morgan nodded, holstering his Colt. The ivory grip with Elizabeth's name seemed to glow in the moonlight. "Bishop goes to trial next month in Denver. Federal charges, no territorial judges to bribe. And the women? Safe at the Triple M for now. Abigail's already talking about turning it into a proper sanctuary." Catherine smiled faintly. Elizabeth would have approved. Morgan sat beside her, his voice softening. Yes, she would have. They watched as the marshals brought out ledgers and documents found hidden in the cabin, the final pieces of evidence against Maxwell Bishop. Maps of routes used to transport women across territorial lines, lists of corrupt officials, financial records that would hang him many times over. "What happens now?" Catherine asked after a long silence. "After the trial, after Bishop pays for his crimes." Morgan looked out over the moonlit landscape. "Life continues. The Triple M needs running. Those women need help finding their way home or building new lives." He turned to her, his weathered face softened by something that might have been hope. "That marriage of convenience, it served its purpose. Judge Wilson can dissolve it whenever you're ready to move on." Catherine studied him, seeing beyond the hardened exterior to the man beneath, a man who had lost everything and still found the strength to stand for what was right. "And if I'm not ready to move on?" she asked quietly. "Then the Triple M has room enough," he replied. "And Bishop wasn't the only man dealing in human misery. There's work to be done." As dawn broke over the foothills, they rode back toward the Triple M, the old wooden post from the town square. The one where Catherine had been tied now stood at the entrance to the ranch, bearing a new sign, "Morgan Ranch, where justice begins." Sheriff Parker and his deputies escorted the wounded Collins back to town. The federal marshals took charge of Bishop's documents and remaining men. Hayes rode ahead to tend to the women at the ranch. Morgan and Catherine rode side by side, their horses walking at an easy pace. The rising sun cast long shadows behind them, but for the first time in years, Morgan rode toward the light rather than away from it. "Elizabeth used to say that silence in the face of evil was evil itself," he remarked as the Triple M came into view. "That not to speak was to speak. Not to act was to act." Catherine nodded. Sarah believed the same. It's what got her killed, and what would have made her proud of today. They crested the final rise, looking down on the ranch, a place that had been built for a family, then turned into a fortress of solitude after Elizabeth's death. Now it was something else entirely, a beginning. "So, Mrs. Morgan," Thomas said, a hint of a smile touching his lips for the first time since she'd known him. "Shall we see what tomorrow brings?" Catherine returned his smile, her eyes clear and determined. "Yes, I believe we shall." As they rode toward home, The morning sun glinted off the ivory grip of Morgan's Colt, illuminating Elizabeth's name, not as a memorial to vengeance now, but as a testament to justice served and peace hard won. In Black Ridge, Maxwell Bishop sat in his cell, waiting for the federal transport to Denver. His empire had crumbled. His men were dead or scattered. All his power and wealth could not save him from the reckoning that had been 3 years in the making. And on the distant plains, the Triple M stood as a beacon, a place where the hunted could find sanctuary, where silence had been replaced by truth, and where blood had finally washed clean the dust of old crimes. The story of Thomas Morgan and Catherine Ward was just beginning. But that, as they say, is a tale for another day.